Welcome everybody to the August 23rd, 2022 Policy Committee meeting. It feels like it's been a while since we last met, which it has been a couple of months. And this is our first meeting that we're having in the evening. So we're hoping with this change of time, more folks will be able to join us. We're going to start the meeting with a roll call. Mr. Epps.
Present.
Mr. Burdell-Williams.
Present.
I know Miss Malia Mulhern and Miss Lohman were not able to join us this evening, so they're not present. And Julie Haywood is present. Next, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from June 22nd, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved, Charles Burdell-Williams.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay,
Second.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great. So that motion carries. Those minutes are approved without changes. Before we start with old business, I just had one quick comment and a big thank you. Prior to this meeting, Ms. Jackson provided us with a summary of some of the things that have been accomplished by the policy committee over the last several years. And I just wanted to summarize what they are and to also thank Mr. Roos, who's here, Mr. Diazio, who's also been with the policy committee, Ms. Jackson, Dr. Scriven, Dr. Smith, and the administrative team, as well as the policy committee for making this possible. We now currently have 190 policies, and all of them have, except for 4, have been reviewed up until 2019, which is a huge accomplishment because we had several that were 10 plus years old. 109 of the 190 policies have a review date of either 2020, 21, or 2022. We've completed a successful consolidation of the series 300, 400, and 500, which means that with that consolidation, we've really reduced the number of overall policies we have in total, and also makes those policies much more focused. We only have 4 remaining policies that we still need to review, other than going back through a cycle of looking at different policies all over again, some of which will be reviewed initially in the Educational Affairs Committee, including policy 103, which is our homework policy, and policy 126, policy 130, which is our homework policy, and 126, which is our class size policy. So I just wanted to mention that and thank everyone that's is in this meeting right now, and extend the thank you and welcome for everyone tonight. So then we'll go on to old business, starting with policy in AR 818, contracted services. And I'll turn that over to Ms. Jackson and Mr. Roos.
Policy in AR 818. The policy will go up for adoption at the September 13th, 2022 board meeting. And I do not believe there were any changes since our last meeting. Ken, you want to?
Yeah, this is basically, these are what I'll call best practices updates, just making sure the language is current. Policy maintenance, I don't believe this is going to change anything, Charles. I don't believe this is going to change anything that the district is doing, but it states it better.
Okay, thank you. Any board comments or questions about policy in AR 818?
Do I don't know if I get recognized.
Mr. Epps, I just,
yeah,
you're in the live meeting, so just, I can't necessarily see if you raise your hand, so please just jump in.
First live meeting. So agreed that it seemed pretty standard. So really just a note about references to either like the procurement, or I remember we recently had something around like ethics around vendors. And so that might come in another part, but just wanted to flag that in terms of references to other policies.
And Mr. Epps, you're talking about the cross references at the end of the policy?
Correct. I don't know if I saw them in the
Yeah, there's two, which is policy 350, educator misconduct, and policy 806, child student abuse.
It's, I don't know if
Let me check the AR. It might be in the AR.
oh, okay. Oh. Yes. Saw there.
We could, if you like, we can add something to the AR.
I just noticed that was a consistent practice with other policies, even some of the others that are on the agenda tonight. And so Ms. Haywood listed two that I didn't mention. So it seems like there's just a number of them that we might want to cross-reference, just as consistent with the other
Sure.
practice.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Epps.
Okay.
Any other board comments regarding policy in AR 818? The only question I had was with respect to COVID testing. Going forward, will we be requiring contracted vendors to provide us with assurance that they've been COVID tested?
It's not required, but it is going to be recommended if individuals are showing signs of symptoms.
Okay. So, Mr. Roos, would it be helpful then to include something under the section you just had in terms of the TB testing, something as it relates to the COVID testing?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay.
Let me just track the changes here.
And Mr. Roos, if necessary, we can have members of my team send the appropriate language based on the last health and safety meeting that they had with the local specialists around that area.
Okay.
In terms of the recommendations.
In accordance with regulations of the Department of Health and the district health and safety plan.
Correct.
Perfect.
Okay.
And then the only other question I had was with respect to any contractor who may need access to our student records in order to perform their duties. Would they only have read access only, or if they don't, would they be required then to return those confidential records after their services are rendered?
Well, we have this provision that talks about needing to follow other board policies and applicable law. It's really going to depend on the nature of the contractor. For example, you might have a related services contractor, like a behavior specialist, who's going to need pretty much almost unlimited access to a student's special education files. So that person has to make sure that they maintain the confidence. And those are standard provisions in all of our independent contracts with outside vendors. So you're covered?
Yep, I think we are. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Any other board comments or questions regarding policy in AR 818? Seeing none, then this will be posted for adoption at the September legislative meeting.
With the cross-reference added.
Yes. Mhm. Okay. And then moving on to policy in AR 828, district-wide safety.
Yes. Go ahead.
I was going to say very little changes there. Most of it pertains to the threat assessment requirements recently enacted. That's really the only changes to the policy. And then there's corresponding additions to the AR as well.
Okay, any board comments to policy in AR 828?
Just a congratulatory note around the inclusion of school social workers, and as part of just as part of that safety conversation. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great. And then just a couple of questions. Should we also cross-reference policy 818 with an expectation that any contractor that we engage would also have to be aware of our health and safety plan?
Sure. We can do that. Just trying to figure where you want to put it in the policy or the AR. Yeah, we can put it there.
Probably the AR, yeah.
All our
Well,
other cross.
I guess the policy.
Okay. You know what? I always get in trouble when I try to do this, so we're going to do this offline.
Okay, not a problem. And then I guess this is a question for Dr. Scriven. In terms of the role of students in promoting safety and security, do we, I mean, I know that we talk about the student handbook, so are all of those things kind of included in the student handbook in terms of the students' responsibilities? And if so, then how are we making that accessible to the students?
What was the last part of that statement, Mrs. Haywood?
Yes, and how are we making the responsibilities to maintain safety, promote safety and security? How do we then make that available to students? I know that it's in the school student handbook.
Yeah, it is in the student handbook, but it may be worth our while to cross-reference and make sure that the salient points that are reflected in the policy are also reflected in the student handbook. I don't want to sit here and take that for granted. So I will take a look, because the students actually are also required to sign off on those handbooks. And that would be a nice, neat way of making sure that what is captured in our board and district policy is reflected in their handbooks.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith, you guys see your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to add that we recently collected all of the handbooks and put them in an electronic folder. And Mr. Diazio has been instrumental in helping us to review them. So we can still add that language because they are in the review process.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that. Any other board comments? Oh, Mr. Russo, were you getting ready to say something?
I was just saying, I will pass along the shout out.
Thank you. Any other board comments to policy in AR 828? Okay. So with the addition of cross-referencing 818 in the policy itself, this policy in AR will be posted for adoption at the September meeting. Okay, the next on the agenda is policy 146, trauma-informed approach. And this is a new policy.
This is new policy, again, legislatively driven. There's no accompanying AR because there's not really, everything in here is pretty much legislative, like it's legislatively directed. So hopefully it's straightforward. If there's any questions or concerns, let me know.
Okay. Any board questions?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Haywood. I just have one question. And in the policy itself, we already love the references. I see it's very legislative driven because of all the references that are included. The one thing that stands out is in the section on services, the first paragraph, a referral system for individual assessments and coordination. coordination of services among the student and students' family, school. Just that system, for us, what is that system? I know it says that a referral system, like for us, what is that? Because I think for the community to understand, right, if we're referencing this system as a service, like I think we do this in various different ways. I just don't know if what we're describing it as is just a system. I think it meets the intent as described, right? All of the various services that we offer. But I just wanted to just put that out there. It's the only place where system actually appears in the policy, and I just it just popped up for me just in reading that.
So is the recommendation, do we want to add clarity around what that standard operating procedure is around this practice? Is that?
So I like, right, going off of what Mr. Roos was saying, right, there wasn't like a recommendation or right now any energy around like an AR. My thought is, well, if we have a referral system, like, do we want to include it? Do we want the community to know what that is so that when they look at this and say, a referral system, they could always email openly, right, or something and say, hey, I'm reaching out to, in response to this referral system. What is it? I haven't heard of it, right? Maybe it's, I don't think it's safe to say, right? I don't think it's that. Of course, there's a process I know that we follow, but I guess it's a question about what is the process and should we be referencing it here? If it has a name, if the community is looking for it, what would they be looking for?
So I think we would want to develop an AR then that would include that information, if that's the ask.
I think that if we're sharing that we have a referral system, I know that we have it, but what is,
So again, it sounds like the request is an update.
Yeah.
We're bound with that.
And that the AR, right, just from my energy, right, it doesn't have to happen in tandem with this old business necessarily. It can come at a separate time.
I'm gonna defer to
for us to have
Bruce.
development, right? We don't have to develop them in parallel.
I think Dr. Schuman's exactly correct, that it's a good thing to have and it's a perfect, an AR is the place to put it. And I started to put it in the policy, but I did it in the wrong place. It's a referral system for individual assessment. I don't put it in the referral system. I'll put it here.
Mr. Berto Williams, you're basically asking for more description of what that referral system is.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, it says more specific, less specific. I spelled it wrong. Spelled that wrong. Fix it. That work?
Mr. Berto Williams, is that what you're looking for?
Yep, I was just reading through it. Yes, actually.
Okay, great.
Right, if it is, so for me, if it is not like spelled out by name, right, like safe to say, right, that's a very standard thing. Like I would have asked to say, hey, our district system, safe to say, is how we, is our referral system. But without that, I think what we do need is more clarity. Just for right? I know, but everyone may not.
Who would be the person that we should reach out to find out what they are?
We will do that through Dr. Smith and Jessica King in her department.
Okay.
Okay, any other board questions or comments regarding policy 146? I guess,
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Singh.
no, who was speaking, Mr. Epps? Go ahead.
Yes, just a second. Sort of sound down the same lane in terms of the authority clause. It mentions the district developing and implementing a trauma-informed approach. And so as I read through those things, similar, like I know many of these things are happening. And so is that that trauma-informed approach? We're in the midst of a strategic planning process now. So is that like it needs to be an actual written out plan? Is it that the things that are happening within schools kind of form an informal approach? But that's what I was left wondering in terms of the authority. I appreciate that it strikes a balance, quite frankly, between trying to set some standards for how to personalize support without actually prescribing what that support has to look like. But still, like how much of that approach is actually formally developed in a written out or processed way? Or if it needs to be. So that's not much of a recommendation to do that, but really curious to what extent does it need to be an actual formalized approach.
So I think with some of these requests, we need to circle back to our team. Some of it definitely is going to come under the goal that we've identified under social, emotional health and well-being in our strategic plan. But let me get with Dr. Smith and hash that out to see what the best next steps to address that are.
Yeah.
So I have my notes as well.
Okay.
So we can follow up.
That's awesome. Because I'm actually supportive of if it's in line with that larger strategic planning process, that's great. That's why I want to make clear. I'm not making a request to go out and put together another approach. If it's in line with what we're already doing, that's actually preferred.
Okay.
And this addition will not impede going for adoption on September 13th. It's not substantive.
I think it would just need to be noted that as a district that we're seeking clarity around what the next steps with spelling that out would look like. So, and I think that's part of what this is. This is continuous improvement, right? So this is part of the work that should be happening fluidly, where we need to reserve the right to be able to make any updates as needed. So I don't know how that is captured, but I think that needs to be part of what we're stating for this to be a fluid process.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the fact that we have this and it came from the state is like that. I mean, right? We think we could have gotten here independently just with the work that I know the district is doing, right? But yeah, now that we do have it, right, it's important for us to respond. Yeah.
It seems like this may be another upgrade that will go under the AR.
Agreed.
Okay. And we'll develop that AR independently, and that should not hold up any adoption of the actual policy at this point. Any community comments? I forgot to ask that on the other two policies that we reviewed. And I see Ms. Ware has a question in the Q&A portion of the Zoom room. And Ms. Ware, you can actually raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. Mr. Barone, if you could unmute Ms. Ware.
I think Kevin's doing it.
Oh, Kevin, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman.
What do I need to do?
Mr. Calkins.
Oh, okay.
You can speak now.
Okay, Ms. Ware, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question directly.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Jennifer Ware here. It's actually, you all answered it while I was in the process of typing. So I was just validating what you all were talking about. But the simple question was just, is the absence of naming the system because it may change over time?
Yeah, and I think, Ms. Ware, thank you very much for that question. I think as Dr. Scriven indicated, we'll put some more meat around an administrative regulation, which is it's really like the how-to from an administrative perspective. The board does not approve those administrative regulations, but they help describe the steps to implement our policies. So if that's helpful. And just Ms. Ware, could you also indicate where in the township you reside?
Absolutely. I'm in Elkins Park. Ward number, I don't know. I'm on
Oh,
the
no.
okay, the
That's
800 block
fine.
of High School Road. So I have a Cedar Brook child.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other board questions? Okay, so policy 146, trauma-informed approach, will go for adoption. We posted for adoption at the September meeting with the understanding that an administrative regulation will be developed. Okay, moving on to new business. We'll start with, these are all of the local board procedures and goals that are listed under new business. So we're starting with name and classification, a policy from 2016.
This is just very straightforward edits. There's nothing really to see here.
And this basically, Mr. Roos, indicates how the board is organized, where the purpose of the board, and that we are part of the intermediate unit. Okay.
Right, exactly. It doesn't really, all it does is name the district, basically what your official address is and what intermediate unit. It lets you know that you are a school district of the second class. That's just based completely on population.
Okay.
Second class school district.
Don't be insulted anyone. Okay, any other board questions? Okay, since we named the intermediate unit, I know that's probably regarding, or probably as required by school code. Mr. Roos, would we likewise name Eastern Center or not? I wasn't sure.
No, because that's not a matter of legislation. You're legislatively assigned to the intermediate unit number 23. You elected to join Eastern by the articles of jointure, what they're called, basically just the agreement that, and you could theoretically come and go if you chose to, which nobody is even hinted that you plan to, but that.
Mr. Bordeaux Williams, don't get scared.
No fear here.
All righty. Any community questions? And if you do have a question or a comment, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. All righty, so this again is new business. So this is a first, will be posted as a first read at our September meeting. Next under new business is authority and powers policy 002.
Similarly, this policy does kind of enumerate what authority you have under law, and how you govern yourself in terms of your local board procedures. The only substantive change to this policy is that you currently have a requirement that if you want to amend a bylaw, adopt or amend a bylaw, you have to do it by a 2/3 vote. This basically allows you to do it by a majority vote. So when you go to adopt these changes you're proposing to make, you're going to need to do it by a 2/3 vote, but once 002 is adopted, it'll then become just a majority vote. So you expected any of them to be close or controversial. You probably want to adopt that policy first, but I don't know that that's going to be the case. You tend to adopt these unanimously anyway.
And I don't think, I could be wrong, I don't think we have any bylaws right now in place.
That's what these are.
Oh, all of these are?
these local board procedures are
considered our
in
bylaws?
concept of bylaws.
Okay, so the consolidation of all of those 1001 through 008 are considered our bylaws. Okay. Maybe that would be helpful to include that because that wasn't really apparent to me. I mean, maybe everybody else, but that was not clear to me.
Okay. Do we use the word bylaws?
I don't. I think in the body of this, it does talk about amending the bylaws, but
I'm going to, why don't we do this? Why don't we just, under where we mentioned local board procedures, which shall constitute the board's bylaws.
that's perfect.
Okay.
Okay. And just one other question. I think in this policy, it talks about the board establishing educational goals and academic standards. Are we doing that through adoption of new classes? Because typically I don't think we're really establishing academic standards. It talks about it shall establish educational goals and academic standards for district schools.
Well, that broadly stated references things like your comprehensive plan, your strategic plan, your policies on education, your graduation requirements. That's all. It's all of those. I'm sure I'm missing something.
Okay. Okay. All right, I didn't have any other questions. Any other board questions for policy 002? Okay. Moving along to policy 003 functions.
This looks like an overhaul, really isn't. It's just a more updated way to say what you said in your prior policy, basically guided by, I say best practices. It's really just revisions that we've been making in other school districts that say it better than what you said before. It's really all this is. There's nothing here that you will, I mean, it's your policy on policies. It talks about how it codifies exactly how you do exactly what you're doing right now, what the board's going to do. Nothing, you won't see any actual changes to anything you're doing. This just says it better than what it said before.
Okay. Any board questions or comments regarding policy 003 functions?
I'm scrolling too fast.
Okay.
It's just a question.
Go ahead,
Just-
Mr. Williams. Mhm.
Thank you. Just like comparing like 02 and 03, like they feel like authority, powers, and functions. Like I feel like they're relatively close in some way. Just like looking through, are we clearly defined to have 02 and 03? Right, because it feels like the section that was removed from 002 almost added to 003. And I'm only saying that because I feel like after reading it that there is some kind of crossover between the two, but maybe, as written, I don't have an issue with what's there. I just wanted to know if it was, are there school districts that don't have authority and power separate from function, or is that something that is like clearly defined?
Well, 002 is basically your umbrella authority for every other policy you adopt. So this says, like 002 says, you're going to be governed by local board procedures, okay? 003 says, okay, how do you create them? We exercise this rulemaking power that we were vested by 002. We do that by adopting these procedures, these policies and procedures. Here's the mechanics of how we do it. So basically, I mean, in a sense, 003 is almost like an administrative regulation, 002.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, okay. Got it. That's what I was getting a sense of, but the perfect way to summarize it for me was the how, right? That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill Williams. Any other board comments regarding policy 003? Okay, any other comments from the community on 003? And if you have a question or comment, please just feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can state your name and where you reside in the district. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go on to policy 004. And again, 003 will also be a first read.
004 is basically the description of you as the board members constituting the board, and clarification that the superintendent has a seat on the board, the right to speak on all matters, but not the right to vote, which is as required by law. Qualifications are set forth in state law. You don't have the authority to vary from these. You can't impose additional qualifications or remove anyone. So if you were to appoint somebody to school board or somebody, you wouldn't be able to do it unless they met all these qualifications. Now, this talks about the process to follow when there's a vacancy. One new feature is the temporary vacancy under the active military service. That's spelled out in here. It wasn't before. And this lets the public also know that when what the term of each office is and when your terms are up. And what happens if somebody fills a vacancy in the middle, or their vacancy occurs in the middle, how long the term is that vacancy is filled for. This also talks about the resignation and or removal of a school board. The resignation occurs by operation of law anytime someone stops being a resident of the school district. But then there is also a provision for removing a school board director, which has never happened here, I don't believe, and rarely happened elsewhere. But for failure to basically do their job, do the job of a school board member, which is showing up for meetings. The conferences just talks about that. This is the authorization for the board to periodically fund, send, promote board members for attending conferences, workshops, and service trainings. Basically talks about how really nobody gets to decide that on their own. They have to be approved by the full board to do that. How you can be reimbursed.
Great, thank you, Mr. Roos. Any board questions regarding 004? Go ahead, Mr. Epps.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. We always, as a board director, right, we always talk about the team of 10. So those first two sentences make sense to me in terms of the board of school directors consists of 9 and the superintendent has a seat. I'm wondering how clear that is. That it's like, does that make the superintendent one of the 9 or not? That might just be standard language, but just wondering how clear that would be to someone who is not. director are either well versed in kind of how we operate. And then just kind of thinking creatively beyond how we currently operate. To what extent, I know there are some instances where in other parts of the country, about 2 or 3, where they have student members of the board. And I know I referenced the strategic planning session earlier. It's something I know students have been talking about over the last few years. Might be something we hear about over the next year or so. And so is that something that would rise to where it would, like certain qualifications would need to be amended? Or is that like a process that would rise to this level in terms of, again, this is just a hypothetical situation, but in terms of if this district were to explore something like that, continue to explore something like that, would it rise to the level of a policy change?
All right, I apologize.
Does that all make sense?
Okay, the first part is I think you're right. I think it wouldn't be clear to somebody who's not an insider what this is. So I changed that to basically saying, in addition to the 9 duly elected or appointed members, the superintendent shall also, making it clear it's a team of 10.
Thank you.
And then that caused me to not focus completely on what you were saying.
So you're quick, because I wasn't even expecting that type of response. So that's good, that's good. So that fixes it right there. So yeah, I'll slow down as well, Ken. So yes, that pretty much addresses it, in addition to the 9 duly elected members. So the second piece, and this is really hypothetical, so saving some of the context, hypothetically, if Cheltenham School District were to introduce student members of the board, is that something that would need to rise to a policy change?
I would recommend that. If you're going to do it, I would recommend doing it as a policy. And we can provide you with plenty of samples, policy language for this if you want to see that. We'd be happy to do that. You don't have to. You could do it, but you want to make it clear what the role and responsibilities are of the student member, the fact that they have a right to comment on things at public meetings, the fact that they get access to some information, but not all information, that they can't attend executive sessions, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's helpful to have that all spelled out so that,
Yeah, I'm one board member, so I know that I've heard since before I was an elected member, it's something that students were discussing. I went to a town hall last school's year where students were talking. So I'm one board member. I certainly support exploring that. But I'm one board member, so I would certainly love to hear what the possibilities are. Granted that we may hear this coming back up from students and other stakeholders as well.
What I would suggest, Mr. Epps, because these have been long-standing conversations where we'd have to really work out all of the details. This is, again, a first read. It does not at all preclude those additional discussions occurring with the students. And to the extent that there is real discussion before we adopt this revised policy, we can make those changes to the policy. Even after we've adopted the policy, if in fact we either, add the description of a student member as a member of the board, and indicated what both the qualifications and the responsibilities would be, we can always go back and reopen this policy at that time. And I'm definitely in support of having those additional conversations with the students.
Appreciate it.
I'll just chime in as well. I do support that, right? I know Dr. Scrivby, you've been a part of some of those conversations going back to last year, right? That we've been trying to, the district, right, find a way to synergize, right, appropriately. So what could the student board, or what does that look like, right? We've had greater student representation at board meetings and board business just in general. So yeah, I support, moving forward and exploring it in further detail, and the recommendation to potentially add it here, strongly like that.
I think in addition to what the role of the student would be, there needs to be some note of what would the process of selecting the student as well as a
And really also expectations in terms of attendance, because we know students are very busy. But there, would be, I'm sure, some expectation that they're able to attend at least the legislative meetings, if not some of the committee meetings.
Appreciate the conversation even tonight, and thinking it through. And I know Dr. Sportin, comes from a district that practices this. So we have resources here, definitely feel the synergy, and would love to join some of those conversations that are happening as well. So I'll leave it at that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for raising that, Mr. Epps. We definitely have some additional time, always additional time to review those requests. And again, if in fact we make any decisions prior to this policy being adopted, we can amend it accordingly. If not, we can always reopen it to adjust and reflect whatever the decisions have been of the board. Okay. Any community comments regarding 004, policy 004? Okay, seeing none, again, this will be a first read policy. Next on the agenda is 005, organization.
Yes, this basically overhauls your current policy. It's got more detail and more guidance on how you run your organization meeting, which most people call reorganization. But one of the things that you do in your organization meeting, a lot of districts do, is this sort of ritual of voting for temporary presidents and everybody presidents. This does away with that. This basically says whoever's been on the board the longest, they're the temporary president. And then we're not going to dispense with that, that unnecessary election. And if there's somehow a tie, then you just do a coin flip. So that takes care of that. And we do this in other districts. It works seamlessly. Talks about, it gives a little bit more detail about what happens with, how this meeting is supposed to go. It basically gives a blow by blow description of how the organization meeting goes. Talks about how when your elections occur, you elect your president, vice president every December, your treasurer every May, and your board secretary every 4th May. You can also elect other people, such as other offices like assistant secretary. Basically, this talks about the election of the president, how it goes. There's nothing here differently than how you do it now. There's no written ballots or anything like that. It's simply the same process you've been doing probably since the districts existed. Similar to the vice president and any other officers that you have. Talks about the process for filling vacancy. It gives you the ability to appoint other officials. There's no timeline on when you need to do any of these things. I believe you do have an assistant secretary there. Does this district? No, you don't appoint an assistant secretary. That's something we generally, it's probably, I'm not sure what the historic reasons why you don't, but it comes in handy when you have somebody who can fill in for the board secretary when they're not around because they have a lot of functions. That election can just occur at the organization meeting, and it just tends to be, it's typically not a board member. It's typically somebody with a clerical role in the administration.
Currently, we use Dr. Smith's secretary.
Oh, then she may.
We have not given her that title as assistant.
Yeah, there's very little for this person to do unless something happens to the board secretary. So it doesn't typically, it's just typically a line on a job description. It doesn't usually carry with it compensation or anything like that. And that's talks about committees. We limit the committees to 4 board members. This board, you typically limit to 4 board members. The reason you do that is you don't want a committee of 5, because then they look like they can basically just usurp the full board's prerogatives in terms of acting at a committee and basically presenting everything at the regular meeting as a done deal. So that's why you don't ever want more than 4 members. You don't want less than, the reason why 4 members is also good is you don't want a situation if you only have 3, or anytime 2 members of the committee are having a conversation privately about committee business, they're violating the Sunshine Act. That's why 4 is the sweet spot.
Mr. Russo, on that comment you just made, we don't have, as you know, kind of pure committees of the board. We have committees typically of the whole. And then policy committee is a committee, true committee. And we have liaison, which is more of an ad hoc committee. That has no more than 4 board members. So most of our board committees are committees of the whole. So educational affairs is the full board, facilities, financial affairs are all full board committees.
Then I think it's appropriate to change this to say other than committees of the whole. Board committees aren't typically more than 4 members.
Yes, because we only have, I think we are probably unique in that way. I think a lot of other school districts have smaller board committees that do the work in between and make recommendations to the full board. But we have not operated that way. I think it's an opportunity for the board to continue having those discussions. But again, that's how we have operated in the past. Doesn't mean that's how we should operate going forward.
Yeah, the committees of the whole are fine because you have all 9. You don't have to worry about somebody who wouldn't want to have a committee with 7 or 8.
Any other board comments regarding 005, policy 005? Okay, any community comments regarding policy 005? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so this will be first read at the September meeting as well. And last on the agenda is 008, policy 008, board orientation.
This is just a slight expansion of the current policy. And it always makes sure it covers things that the school code requires board members to be trained in as board members. The only 2 additions I think are to what this just aligns with the state law and board member training. There's those topics, which were similar but not identical to what you already had.
Okay, and I wanted to thank you, Mr. Roos, and Mr. Diazio, as we're bringing on more, new board members. You've been really great in, taking up your time to sit down with those new board members and go over this level of orientation with them. It's been very helpful.
Pleasure.
Any board questions regarding policy 008? Okay, any community comments or questions regarding policy 008? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you. So I guess we'll move towards adjournment. Thank you, everybody, for your participation this evening. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved, Charles Riddell Williams.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second, Zach Reps.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned for this evening. Everybody have a great night.